Well, it came out. My husband, who's here, is Iranian, and it was that culture shock between East and West. I guess it was very rich material, and I found when, and I have Indian friends, and it would happen like when relatives arrive from Asia, they would go, "We're here and we're staying 3 and 4 months," and I go, "Oh, you know, people in the West don't stay 3 or 4 months in your very small apartment, and they don't open your mail when it comes in." And, you know, it was all these sort of things. I was going, "Why is your mother opening the mail?" And he was like, "I have to see what my son is up to." You know, it was that. So the more it's kind of weird as a writer, because the worse they behaved. Sorry, Gene, but it's my divorce novel. But the worse they behaved, the more I thought, this is great material. Which is very dangerous as a writer, because your life can be slipping into utter shit, and you'll just be really interested, going, "Fantastic material! You know, this is getting better and better as it gets worse and worse." And you just start, you know, it's just weird. You live kind of as this compartmentalization. It's kind of like writing as a mental illness to protect you from your own life. So I guess I wrote this book, and it was based on. You know, seeing my husband's family coming from Iran and coming straight to California and all that sort of weirdness. And then there was a part in where they come as refugees to Ireland, because I was back in Ireland at that time. So I suppose if I wasn't back in Ireland at the time, I wouldn't have written this section. And I was seeing, my father runs a place for the homeless in Dublin, and they had a lot of a lot of people from Africa, a lot of unaccompanied minors, and there was all sorts of strange things happening. And so I guess I'll just read a small bit from this book. This is the only book my husband has never read, by the way. We'll talk about that later. Yes, by me. Yes, by me. Yeah. Qualify that. But Ishmael, he's very learned. He's very learned. But Ishmael and Farah are the parents, and they're kind of you know, it was that shocking, the kind of outrageous racism and things that was done. You know, because I suppose everybody is racist in their own way, but we're trained not to say it out loud and not to say things to each other. But I used to find it quite shocking, just you know, how people talked about each other. So they've arrived in Ireland, and they've been doctors back in Iran, and I invented a kind of mythical country called Iraq that was quite like Iran, because I didn't want to get killed, I think. But this is Ishmael and Farah, and they've arrived back, and their kids are in California. They were taken from a refugee camp, and they're put with their uncle. So they're really at a loss, and they've just had a baby very late in a refugee camp. They've been given refugee status in Ireland, but of course most people who were given refugee status in Ireland had no clue where Ireland was when they arrived in it. There was no reference, and they would have preferred to go to the United States, but they didn't get there. When Ishmael arrived in Ireland, he went first thing to the US Embassy to try to get a visa and get out of Ireland. He pinned a yarmulke to his head. "I'll say I'm a Jew," he told his wife. "They love the Jews over there. Just get us out of there and over to Zolo and Layla." Ishmael sighed, "I'm so tired." Heather, their assigned, overextended 24-year-old Australian social worker, called Mo's Malibu number for them, but they only ever got the answering machine, and he never called back. "I was busy," he would later say. "It's not my fault you ruined your life. I warned you years ago to get out of that country." Ishmael left Farah. The vindication he felt when the Queen tracked him down and asked him to come to France had been enormous. Farah forbade him to go to France without her to see the Queen, but only he was granted a special visa through the Queen's connections. "Her Majesty needs me," was all he said. Farah noticed all her jewellery gone and knew that he had to pay for his own ticket. Farah despised Ishmael. Everything was wrong with him. He was no good. His reason had vanished with his prestige. She told Ishmael to never come back. He told her there was nothing to come back to. When Ishmael packed his leather case, he would not catch her eye. He did not kiss the baby goodbye. "Mere Dad will look after you." "How could you leave me here in this country with all these unwashed asses?" she said. In the new host country, when Farah was left alone with the baby, she could not stop thinking that she might hurt it. She imagined eating it, A circle of red veins and bones where the neck was, the baby headless. When she changed the nappy, she looked at the slits and folds and imagined a future where that might be hurt. Girls were beyond protection. The room in the hostel was a dark hole. She rarely opened the blinds on the window. The grim view is a red brick wall and a partial view of another window. More refugees, blacks, moving about their rooms like olives in a jar. The suspended way refugees were kept alive was very little to do with living. It was more like pickling. The Africans told Farah that they didn't like the streets. Too much hostility out there. The black women were tall and slender. They wore bright colours in the yard where their children played on swings. They stood close together and reserved their smiles only for each other. The light in Ireland was gone at 4 o'clock. There was no sunset because there was no sun. During the day, grey clouds were densely mashed into the sky. By evening, a tidal darkness collapsed behind the clouds. When Farah fed the child, she sat on the bed and imagined herself falling and cracking the baby's head off the hard tile floor. She let the night come lapping around her like liquid phobia. She talked about this to Heather, the social worker. Heather pursed her lips and said she should consider getting antidepressants from a doctor. She was a new mother, yet she was an old mother, 43, and functioning on 3 hours of fractured sleep. Plus she was recovering from the operation, major abdominal surgery. Her husband had left her. Had you ever heard of postpartum depression? Or was her life just ruined? Then the social worker told her that the island of Ireland was the first stop for all the westerly winds blowing off the Atlantic, that the clouds were always low-lying and rain-producing, that the ancient people who lived here, their worst fear was the sky falling on their heads. That's it, I'll start with that very depressing point. But it is funny, because my father, I go to his place, and it was a lot full of, he houses homeless people, but then there was a huge surplus there was a lot of refugees that he was housing as well, and it was a different kind of Ireland, and it was a different Ireland they encountered from the idea of the tourist Ireland of, which we liked ourselves as a people, that people would come over and, go down to County Clare and listen to music sessions, but these were new people arriving in, and they were encountering, they were all in the poor areas, and it was a very different kind of Dublin they were encountering.
Yeah, but the fact that, you've just read from this book that kind of counters the argument that contemporary Dublin wasn't being written about, or...
Yeah, just nobody was reading me.
Yeah.
That was the problem in Ireland at the time. Yeah, that is the problem. Nobody's reading me.
Yeah. That's the only problem.
It is one of the only problems, I'd say.
But, there was this hullabaloo in Ireland last year about this topic, about whether, Ireland was, was enough been written about, or had been enough written about the Celtic Tiger, and so this last year it was that the novelists had failed us, and this year now it's that the dramatists have failed us.
And now we've nobody to elect for president. That's even worse. Our presidential election is on Thursday, and people still don't know who to vote for.
No. But this, like, yourself and Sean and Keith both wrote kind of Dublin novels that just, perhaps weren't widely read enough, or just...
Thanks.
Well, no, but they are there. But no, I think the point is that that some of what is being said in those novels about contemporary Ireland were things that people didn't necessarily want to hear or read about, or and yet they continue with the argument against or saying that not enough has been done. It's in the same way for the dramatists. I mean, maybe we're just not willing to hear what's been said on the stage, or so that sense of ownership over what a writer writes. But that said, Sean here guest edited an issue of the magazine last summer, and one of your complaints was that there wasn't enough contemporary writing coming in, or short stories certainly coming in, that were set in Dublin. Can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I had the experience of doing what Declan does normally, which is just basically reading through everything that comes in. And what really struck me was the absence of, in particular, short stories, short fiction, set in even in an urban environment in Ireland by writers who were, well, let's call them emerging writers. You know, people who were trying out their first short stories. Most of them were being set in a rural environment, as if they were afraid to position a story in the city. I think to link that up with the reasons for that, I can't explain. But I think that part of the problem around writing the boom or whatever was that the experience of being in Ireland was the experience of being part of a very suffocating consensus, which of course links up to that people actually didn't want to read about anything at the time other than how great it all was. I really can't see how people can complain on one hand that the writers weren't writing, while at the same time everyone was part of a big almost amnesia going on about what is actually involved in transforming a place morally, aesthetically, financially. What has to be done, people and communities, in order for that to happen. We've seen the consequences of that, I think, in the last year.
Yeah, but the Irish as well love being miserable, because I've noticed we were so guilt-ridden about our tiny boom that was sandwiched between 800 years of depression. We were so, everybody was walking around going, oh, we've lost the run of ourselves, we've lost the run of ourselves. Have another cosmopolitan, but we've lost the run of ourselves.
I don't know
and
if
there was a
guilt at
relief
the
almost
time.
when it all crashed.
I don't.
There was a lot of glow. When it all crashed, people were almost like, oh, thank God, we're back to being wretched again. We're much more comfortable whinging and moaning and sitting in the bars, weeping into salty tears into our pints. I find Irish people much more comfortable with misery, and we were very uncomfortable with our, you see, we were very uncomfortable with our
We're talking
success.
about it like it's an Irish problem. It's not Ireland alone. It had a recession and went back. It happened in America and in Britain and Portugal, Greece. They all did it. But the Irish were the only ones who didn't march about it when they were told the austerity measures were coming in. The Irish were like, yeah, that's right. We didn't deserve it. And you're talking about, they used to say that they had stone soup for 800 days, then they were eating swans and helicopters, and now it's back to stone soup.
But I think there was, some people did go out in March, but it wasn't in anything like the numbers that it should have been, and now we're likely to be electing somebody who pretty much is tied in with the Fianna Fáil party, who were overseeing that great rush to disaster, it turns out.
But that's very Irish, because we're going to probably elect a president who was associated with the party that ruined the country, but it's kind of our sort of, it's like going back with it's like we've been, it's like the wife was being beaten around the head and thrown out, and they've taken the house, and then we're going to crawl back and go, but I still love you. I mean, there's something very Irish about electing, it's like the bad ex.
Yeah.
We're going to elect the bad ex on Thursday.
I think we're coming close to the time that we have to stop talking. But I do want Sean to read maybe a little bit. You want time? Yeah. Sean's just a few minutes. So just Sean will introduce what he's been writing. It's part of a series of stories that he's been writing. One of them is in the issue, but this is another one, and he's just going to read a short piece from that and introduce it for us. So. And then we'll take questions, and we might give some answers.
All right, yeah, this is just a wee piece called Freedom Number 5. It's about a guy called Jerome Traynor. He's a barber, but we're just, in terms of the story, we're just following him on the events of one evening, and we don't know what it is that he's actually really doing. We're just quite outside of his. We're watching him from outside. So he's around the town a bit, and then he goes home. The music was also on low. The threats of a border town hip-hop gang barely audible in the bedroom, where he went to change the bedclothes, replacing the sheets, the pillow covers and the duvet cover with new ones ripped out of the packaging. After that, he stood in the balcony for a while drinking some vodka. Though the phone was still in the pouch on his belt, checked over and over again for a missed message. Two thin black arms pulled the curtains in an apartment across the courtyard. The same rain was falling silently through the sodium light in the communal gazebo. He went inside again. The music jumped a notch or two, and he came out again to the groaning noise of the security gate opening below. A reddish 09 Merc rolled in and parked beside the bins. The engine was cut. Trainer sucked in, closed his eyes and gripped the wet balcony rail, which wobbled slightly. He heard a car door and bent over for a look. A man got out and then a woman from the passenger seat. They were both in shorts, hoodies, gym clothes. Trainer felt the give and the loose rating, went back inside the apartment once again, found the toolbox under the sink and carried it out to the balcony. He got down on his knees. First the torch wasn't working, then he couldn't find a spanner, which would grip the bolt securing the bracket to the wall. He tried the torch a second time, knocking it against his palm as he moved indoors again, this time along the corridors towards the bedroom where he took a candlestick from the locker, sniffed it, and sniffed again more deeply and dropped heavily into the wicker chair by the bed. For a few minutes he sat in the dark room, filling his brain with rose petals. The CD finished. Up at his feet again, he began to light each of the candles in their different sticks and holders. As he waited to be sure the wick in the last candle had caught, the biggest candle in the corner it was, a thick lavender scented one on a three-legged pedestal. A sudden squeaking noise made him drop the lighter and turn around quickly with his eyes wide. It was the wardrobe door, tipping open by itself. Trainer laughed, seeing his own reflection in the full-length mirror screwed to the door. He laughed again, watching himself in the mirror this time, and rubbing the scar on his forearm from a badly removed tattoo. Going closer, he reached inside the wardrobe to touch the clothes, the dresses and blouses, a white fur coat, a green silk blouse with ruffled sleeves, and a leather catsuit, running his fingers around the embroidered edges of the holes for her breasts, and along the sharp tips of the spikes down his shoulders. That was when he heard his phone ding. It was a text message. Success, baby blue, on way back in cab. The guy with her was tall, thick black blow-dried hair to his shoulders, freckles on his nose, and gold in his teeth. He had second thoughts when he weighed up Trainer, but Jasmine settled him, wriggling herself in front of him, offering him a drink, pulling him down beside her on the sofa. Just ignore the big lumps, she said. Trainer put himself in the armchair opposite them, with his vodka and a ready rolled joint from the tent box. Jasmine was persuading the guy that he did this every few months, invited a guest to come round and play, spice things up a little. The guy looked at Trainer and said, "So you don't get involved then at all? I've heard some of you undery types need to be tied up to watch, because I'm straight, man, I'm square, right? So keep your distance." Trainer was about to reply when Jasmine got in first. With him, he's a big softy, pretend he's not there. His big kick is to see somebody fucking his woman's brains out. Don't you, sugar? It helps him freeze his spirit. We do it all the time. Isn't that right, my big ugly, jealous, tough guy?
That's it.